Understandably, I think you will agree, if you are a child of your era, as I am, born in 1960, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with a background family from St. Louis and Cincinnati, Tipton, Iowa, pioneers, pilgrims, non-slave owning community college professors, newspaper ink devils, soldiers. If you're like me, a child of your era, it will become over as a distressing fact that King Crimson were behind the terroristic attacks in childhood that I went to them begging for help from. Irony. Irony of those who dole out privilege and have access to the finest refinements. Sad to discover that John Lennon's double fantasy was the cloak of another final solution from the European powers. Sad, but not the only time that has happened on this planet. Only saddest of all that we're not mobilized to make sure it never happens again. This talk is a brainstorming session on how to handle the many issues that need to be consolidated into an evidentiary presentation. This talk is copyright 2022, James McRyland Crary. I come from an area around the University of Pittsburgh that under George Bush developed an on-campus defense semi-autonomous unit of unusual dimension across the street from St. Paul's Cathedral and the Synod where the Gurdjieff Society would meet. St. Paul's Cathedral is reflected in the glass of the Software Engineering Institute of Carnegie Mellon, which goes by CMU, a discrete acronym for Church Military Union. And across the ways is a rival institution for public students that my father chose to represent as chair of philosophy of education, turning down student teaching at Harvard, the presidency of Georgia, because they wouldn't desegregate the school in the latter case, because he wanted to work for public institutions in the former. Same Bush and same ship in the Navy as Bush. I'm a son of the San Jacinto. It's a rival institution for the public, less wealthy, less elite, more to my father's liking, called Pitt. Strange that combination, church, military union, and Pitt, that we should find there, of all things, the Texas school book of Dallas, Texas fame. Behind it, cloak and dagger, the Henry Mancini crowd behind the 1964 film A Shot in the Dark and Casino Royale with the Noah virus of Woody Allen. So, how do we learn about the process of comprehending the evidence? I have a bulletin board called storychecksout.org. There's evidence there, and I'll be submitting more evidence in my dissertation to the administrative framework of the local college scene here in Tacoma, where I have Section 8 housing and onset Parkinson's diagnosis, probably already in stage 2. Well, of the many issues, we find that I had detected a super story from the advent of Hollywood. As you know, the earliest epic glamour Oz, the Oz of the Ku Klux Klan. It was called The Birth of the Nation. It was made by D.W. Griffith, who was introduced to the Italian Futurists, a Cubist spin-off group in Italy. And Freddie Luigi introduced him evidently to Benito Mussolini, whose son was a hotshot behind the scenes in Hollywood. And that's where we get the beginnings of the mayhem and destruction and war imagery that consumes Chernukov cinema in Russia and Hollywood cinema in California, always masquerades behind the angry fathers of Kirill and Robert Bork as standing up for mom and dad. I assure you there are no family values in the slaughterhouse of war. Family values is not what Roger Waters, that punk, had in mind when he unleashed sex, drugs, and rock and roll on a movement that was meant to be led by Kennedy and King, an era that was meant to be led by Kennedy and King. But that's what we have now. And the cinema apparatus that reasserted its power after the Civil War for the defeated, rightly defeated. Slave owning is horrifying. Went on to reassert their dominion after the World War II with Axis backstabs. You could see it. UFA was no UFO. It was well-known German cinema led by Joseph Goebbels, from which Ingmar Bergman came. She starred as a friend of mine, and for whom the bell tolls. She starred as Martha Gellhorn, who lived in the White House with Eleanor and Franklin. My father knew Eisenhower, too. Jimmy C, they call me sometimes. Putting aside for a moment some of the unhappy coincidences in what is overall confirmable War College Index, like the fact that I was attacked by men named Ronnie and Casper, just like Reagan and Weinberger in 1974, 6 years before anybody really knew who they was in the public domain. D.W. Griffith, like Cecil B. DeMille, were biblicists. Babylonian imagery in their epics. They synthesized into an incredible inside group with the power of mass illusion, the magic of Hollywood. And you're right to associate Disney with things like The Wizard of Oz, the fantasy era. But The Wizard of Oz got off the ground in 1914, the era of the Cubists. It wasn't just the birth of the nation, Gone with the Wind. Victor Fleming made both Gone with the Wind, which glorified the antebellum Old South of the Confederacy and swore for the first time in cinema. Glorified them. Victor Fleming, who made The Wizard of Oz. The books are traced back to the birth of the nation era, 1914. What do we find in D.W. Griffith's assistant directors, Raoul Walsh, the team that came up with the Burning Cross for the KKK for the first time? It was adopted from the movie. Did you know that? Made Reagan's wartime films with Errol Flynn, who lived in Laurel Canyon where Houdini lived. And it has all sorts of pro-Axis semiotics, a super story involving three things. Two Virgins Pussy Ball, which was John Lennon's theme, which was clocked to the AIDS attack. The rescue of Hitler and Lenin and synthesized down into the theme of Casper or Lazarus, the friendly ghost, and the disappearing acts. Murder of JFK fits in suitably well for the survival of Hitler and the rise of the Yoko Ono's revenge team from Hollywood and Pentagon Disney. The leapfrog oligarchs behind Chernuka film and people being shot on Hollywood sets. I'm very serious. It's in all of them. It's a super story. Kennedy's assassination comes out again and again. We learn the details from the Hollywood overlap in Japanese cinema, in American cinema, in German cinema. They had UFA was no UFO, but they had puppet strings operating all over the world. UFA produced Ingrid Bergman, who played a friend of mine for whom Bell Tools. And their symbol, no less than Casablanca, was a double cross. You can bet the Fuhrer in Mendoza, Argentina, was licky chops with glee when he pulled that one off with Reagan. Casper, they called it. Ain't that something? Kennedy assassination, two versions, Pussy Ball, and the rescue of Hitler in synthesis with the Houdini of Lenin. Houdini and Ouspensky, the fourth dimensional theorists from Kharkiv and Moscow, were working with Picasso and Prokofiev when the first books like TikTok of Oz by Frank Baum came out back in the 1910s before Einstein's special theory of relativity. And the Cubists got their hands in to the thinking processes of an idea that began to come to fruition before World War One even, and all through World War One and World War Two, to the present day with Robert Anton Wilson as here in Tacoma, whose name appears in the first Humanist magazine, a school of thought my father was in, January 1964. Featuring JFK mysteriously bisected on the cover. You'll see some of this evidence in my bulletin board and in my dissertation. What have we here? It's Blas Sanders, a one-armed man who lost an arm in World War One and came up with the idea of a phantom arm. Houdini, disappearing acts, Hollywood magic, and presto, the Star Trek crime of the world. How to convince the entire planet that something happened that didn't. Lenin's assassination was staged and phony. It was an augury of a Swami Nostra to pull strings behind the scenes. And they called their mayhem Medicine Man. COVID-19 was part of their Medicine Man project. They had no problem attacking children, using little girls, abusing elderly people, betraying our trust, attacking our public schools, and bad mouthing our distinguished citizens and veterans, leading us into the temptation of believing that we belonged on top of a world that we were born to try to help. They were from positions of privilege from which we were given precious opportunities, and we still have some of these opportunities. COP15, Biodiversity Project, and COP27, the commitment to end fossil fuels, is an attempt to bring about a phasing out of the terrifying power that C.S. Lewis called that hideous strength. The motor Ford, Henry Ford, with the first war loans were tied to the first auto loans. The factory, the freeway has always been a highway of death when it came to oil wars and the mania of the oil warriors, who for some reason are just filled with hatred for their fellow man. Nobody can assuage it. It's time we phase out their domination. But the essence of their domination is Pentagon Disney. The ability to pull a stunt, a fast one, like Double Fantasy. There's nothing in the Angry Fathers movement. The long beards of terrifying rage towards young people who've fallen wayward of the church in the royal mayhem of all-out war. There's nothing in the gifts and contributions of the world's sensitive, devoted religions, and hatred for sectarian violence, and hatred of sectarian violence. Excuse me. I'm not going to preach to you not to hate the hateful. Nobody knows what to do when they become overwhelmed with sadness and resentment at the cruelty of people who misuse their power. And I'm not going to preach to you. You have to come to your grips with how you feel about things like that yourself. For me, I always turn to Martin Luther King and Pope Francis. That's just who I am. I write poetry. So what we see not only is a superstore of three elements: the Kennedy assassination, Casper, the family fascism, and two versions Pussy Bowl, which was clocked to the AIDS attack, of which the semiotics were obvious once they were identified, because they're pernicious in the background of all sorts of films all over the world. The super story that the Insiders Group must have had quite a toast about as far back as the Cubism movement. But there's a strange, obvious idea of landing on their desks, fourth dimensional power, inside circle, Wizard of Oz, Houdini, and then strangely disappearing into thin air. Where did it go? We see a leapfrog oligarchy now. Anybody can tell you that journalists fighting for the money to pay for their medical insurance are subject to pressures. But the journalist community in the age of newspapers had enough pride to defend the independence of research journalism. That seems to be gone. It's a different show. It's a push button iPhone battle of manias going on in the orb of central media bank, whatever you want to call it. So the idea landed on all of their desks to pull a fast one, to use the magic for a reality show. And then it vanished mysteriously. Why? Because it was adopted. Put on your thinking cap, take off your spinner. Because it was adopted. That's why. You see in the script of Texas school book, Nabucco's stupid code about what boys should do and girls should do. It says Thursday's a day two. So what's wed first, right? Wednesday first, wed first. What stupid code what girls should do? Well, Nabucco was the star of the Children of Hiroshima. Okay, so they followed my father's voice on the radio, and Bush gave a good dishonorable backstab to help Ringo Starr pull this off. And they say that the mushroom cloud is the devil. Well, probably. But does sex out of wedlock lead to a mushroom cloud? That sounds like the advertisement for hair. Remember the mushroom cloud? So why are they misleading us if that's what they believe? It's because they don't believe anything. They're just putting on a show and preying on our finer sensibilities and our fears. The UFA isn't a UFO. Everybody knows what the UFA was in Hollywood. In German cinema, it was the hard side of Dr. Jekyll when it came to Europe cinema's domination of Hollywood behind the scenes during the rise of the Axis. We're better than that. We should act better than that. Oswald went to Russia and came back. Sergei Eisenstein and Disney had something going. Yeah, the essence of the problem is that Oswald appears with John Wayne in a picture. Well, it turns out that Oswald Mosley was the name of the British Union of Fascism's leader. And what else? General Edwin Walker appears on the back of a book by Colin Cross from 1962 as the world's most reprehensible racist. Yet he was the one starring testimony about Oswald at the Warren Commission, not a year after he was arrested for threatening to kill JFK himself, and there are movies of Oswald and this guy's stuff. So they were lying. Oswald and Walker pulled this for the British Union with the British Union of Fascists and the Chernuka crowd in Russia. And they angry fathers. We hear it all the time. The angry fathers are going to send us to Vietnam. The angry fathers don't want Negroes in the public schools, and so on. We hear it all the time. We need a break from it. Follow the chain of evidence. The rifle was in Michael Payne's garage. Oswald went to that house once a week to visit his wife, not his rifle. Michael Payne's cousin worked on the board of directors of the United Fruit Corporation. So did Allen Dulles, who met Adolf Hitler in 1933 to forgive his campaign debt so he could become chancellor, and then sat on the Warren Commission. Jack Ruby's psychiatrist was the same as Charles Manson, and by the way, the script was signed from Manson Cinema, Mancine. He had the same attorney as Herman Goring's widow, Melvin Belly, beamed down from Star Trek, where he was a guest star. And then there was Redoubtable John McCoy, who sat in the Munich Olympic booth with Hitler. And they have these strip joint shows. The Ford booth was a theater. Well, who's Nabucco Stupid Code come from? The Neva Corporation. Neva Mancine was named in the script. It's pornography. They gouged me in a place called King's Estate, King's Heavenly Estate, as a child, because I was easily baited out by a girl's sexual overtures. I was baited by the masters of Hollywood. I was the master's bait. So they tortured me and gassed me. And they called it, they used as an advertisement, a C in the Star of David. And the letters came from the Israeli Holocaust survivor community. My hat is off and my heart goes out to Israel, who lost many people in COVID-19. Don't protect these people. They're crazy. But you can't reason with the Democratic Party machinery or anyone else. Rational people realize that you don't just offer love to the fascists who are criminally insane. But the Beatles leaned on me to forgive Casper, who tortured me, in the name of an Aztec group called Artec, who went by Art, because they're going to build an ark, right, to save the planet. None of this sustainable population education theory, none of this echo schools. We're just going to pick and choose who gets to go and who has to leave. Well, it's not, in my opinion, meant to work that way. Buckminster Fuller, whose work I thought Artec was associated with, another master bait, was somebody who showed in his book Critical Path that the fossil fuel giants were hiding and suppressing the abundance available for the human population. And he showed that population actually went down as people were educated and cared for. A relevant fact. So when you look at the Swami Noster stuff of the occult, was getting a hatred for public schools, they sent in this apparatus to attack me while I was trying to go to attend 7th grade at Fulton Elementary. You have people like Aleister Crowley and King Crimson's lyrics and the Sgt. Pepper's. And you have Edgar Casey coming up in the area where the agency for Attica State Prison psychiatry, who kidnapped and tortured me, Wattenmaker, talk about a scary name, appears in cooperation with King Crimson. Colin Wilson's paranormal crime intelligence stuff and Sir Wex Graves' secrets. There's a lot of indications about the way I was attacked as it's a monkey business from the people who killed the Kennedys. And one of the things we also see is that the idea of the Wizard of Oz killing JFK comes out in the fact that Cliff Robertson starred as JFK in PT-109. then stole his persona, stole his face, and was in the opening episode premiere of Outer Limits. Remember, We Now Take Control of Your Television Set, The Wizard of Oz. That was postponed for Candy's state funeral, and then he circles the World Trade Center on 911 in his private plane. Talk about the questionable aptitude of our intelligence services to miss out on that altogether and not have any explanation for it. So, what I suspect is they hope for a day when they're unmasked and people say, well, the gig is done and congratulations for a job well done. It ain't going to happen. So, what's going to happen instead is public schools are going to teach that we learn not to be afraid of oversight over the Hollywood spectacle mongers. And we didn't let ourselves fall to fascism, so-called enemy within. Supposedly we're the enemy within because they upload a neuroplasm and change our personality of our entire society. They're trying to change the personality of our entire society. See, that's not going to happen. There's too many people who care. There's too much sense, rhyme, and reason. Too much going for civilization. Too many advances in medicine. Too many people who love the modern age. Too many people who don't believe that anybody who opposes Adolf Hitler is the devil. I mean, it's absurd. People have allowed Hollywood to scare themselves half to death with fanatical weird mongering. We all know that there's a potential to destroy ourselves. We've known that for a long time. Don't just give people the upper hand who have a mania for the idea of pushing it. Because the word is scary enough, but there are things that we scare ourselves with senselessly. Do you believe that fear of the unknown plays no role in our extermination or mass extinction of species that live in absolutely benign relationship with us? We're the ones who are triggering blowback from the earth by waging war on something we senselessly fear. And they went after me the same way. I was a harmless poet, deaf, easygoing, and they kept poking me in the neuroplasm until they got me scared enough to say, "Stop it, or I'll cry out loud." And then they said, "See, he's dangerous," and that's the nature of human reality. And this is pit psychology. You need to smoke these stupidos out and find them other place of work. And replace them with people who have some sense. Because Pittsburgh has some good, authentic reasoning, sensibility about it. There are some excellent educators in the city of Pittsburgh. Why do they need to be alive with something like this? Can you explain? Somebody want to explain? This is just a brainstorming session for my essay, but I'd like somebody to step forward and explain why and how this happened in broad daylight, with nobody trying to even do anything to try to help me deal with the criminal insanity of a movement this domestic, disturbingly driven to commit domestic terror on a disabled person. You know, I think it's because of these King Crimson nuts, to be perfectly honest with you. I think they're obsessed with, some sort of iconography, and they want me to role play some icon idiocy that they think is overarchingly saleable to their fan base. Where they really did a number to my life. Boy, they did a number to my life. Talk about evil rumors. They got hold of a story, Two Virgins Pussy Bowl, right? They got hold of this storyline. That girl who was lascivious with me, but who I, even after dating her for 2 years, she was still a virgin, right? that this proved something evil about me. This was their storyline, right? So they dump an Italian Milanese trumpy tune girl on me from Oxford, and then make off with the real prize of the script. Do we go to? This is John Lennon saying they were avenging his death. There was all sorts of indications that they were planning to do this all along. It's just making a ridicule of the Kennedy liberal humanism that believed the public education and healthcare were the answer to our prayers. They're just making a mockery of us. How can anybody not see that? I don't understand how anybody could just go along with the fiendish cruelty of biological taunting that came with poisoning me in the mouth in Seattle, for example. In the name of Yoko Ono as some sort of spiritual warrior or something they're calling Casper. Nabucco and her stupid Cobra boys, what you two girls would do. Look, if you're one of these longbeards and you care about children and you want them to understand sexual psychology and religion and so forth, stick to the theme. What's that have to do with going out and hiring attack prostitutes to brutalize somebody who's already been brutalized before? That's what really happened. That's the narrative. It's real, and it's something insidious and vicious crawled up out of the war machine of Euro goblins in our entertainment system. And we need administration and oversight over them. So let's get to work putting a little bit of authority, of rational democracy over the excesses of these celebrities and charismatics from Hollywood.